that are like live and are sort of going, I mean, the usual modality of classes, and this is new for everybody. So it's an experiment in some sense. And I mean, looking at the assignment, it looks that this experiment is not too bad. I mean, it's sort of working. So that, I mean, I don't know how much it's hard from your side, but it's, I mean, one good thing is that, I mean, perhaps it's very hard, but it's working. So you are learning, which is something that is very good, I think. So I'm really, I mean, again, I didn't go through all of it. So, but from the first look, it looks, I'm extremely happy for whatever it matters. But I mean, the thing it matters, I think, is that I mean, it's clear that you are learning. So I also hope that, I mean, I saw that most of you did it in groups, in large groups, which I was very happy about. I mean, I think it's a, I mean, let's say, of course it's your choice, but I think that this is, let's say, a way to de-isolate yourself from your screen. And so I hope that you took the occasion to discuss and to be in contact with others. Okay. So given that, I mean, if you, I mean, I'll try to send you a feedback to each of you by, I mean, I don't want to make a promise, but let's say 1-2 weeks. I mean, because like, yeah, it's, I mean, the good side is that you did big groups, so you have few homeworks to correct, but they are above 30 pages, some of those. So it's really a thesis. I mean, yeah, again, I'm very, very happy about it. I mean, it's like, it's fantastic, but it takes, of course, time from my side to process. So it's now my turn to work. So I'll try to send you feedbacks as soon as possible, let's say. Great. So, I mean, the other point I hope, I mean, I will not ask you, but I hope you sort of, at the end, you enjoyed the exercise, and that there was a component that was not too much of a pain. Okay, I don't want answers to that, of course. Let me believe what I want to believe. So, okay, now, are there questions? So, we sort of reached, oh, sorry, I don't see you anymore. Ah, here you are. So I put last week a super long video, which was not particularly technical, about the introduction to evolution, which is something that we might be able to discuss. And I think we never covered, we never discussed the part on stochastic exponential growth. So just to, before we start with question, just I think it's a good moment to give you a direction of what we are going to do. So as I said, sort of multiple times, I mean, we sort of, yeah, we are starting the part of on evolution, on mathematical models of evolution, which sometimes is called population genetics. And so what we're going to do in the next lectures is to write models of how variation change over time in a population. And so to do that, we are going to introduce or sort of refresh you on models of stochastic processes, and particularly on models where you have a model of population dynamics where you have stochasticity. So this is what is gonna keep us up busy for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Now, yeah, I know you are counting and you're saying, well, but then there is Christmas. So there are 4 weeks to Christmas. I mean, 4 weeks of classes. So I hope we are gonna be done before Christmas. I mean, in 4 weeks. there is a trade-off because like I can send you all the videos, let's say this week, but it's probably too much for you. I mean, I don't want to. Yeah, I know. I'm not doing that. So there is a trade-off between finishing before the end of the year and giving you a good pace where you don't feel overwhelmed. So what I'm trying to do is to get understand how fast you're going through the Q&As, and so adapt to that. I mean, if you don't mind, I'll try to speed up a little bit, and then we can have multiple Q&A in the new year in case. So, I mean, the other complication is that I wrote on the chat there is going to be this school that is going to keep me busy and attached to a screen for 3 weeks. So the school is going to be mostly in the afternoons, Italian afternoons. So, which means that we have to decide what to do for the Q&As. Because I mean, the current schedule is conflicting with the school, and also, I mean, I encourage you to, I mean, if not, take and look at and watch all the classes to follow some of those and to participate. I think you have all the technical tools to understand the vast majority of the lectures. And you should be able to understand also the motivation of the lectures. So I think that it's a good, I mean, it's a very good occasion for you. So, I mean, it's also okay if you watch these lectures and you are a little bit behind on the class. I think it's fine. We can sort of do more Q&A in January if needed. Okay. I mean, with the Q&A, we can go as long as you want. I mean, even to 2024.
I have a question about that. Aren't we required to end the courses by the end of December?
I mean, you are not required. I am required, which is a difference. So it's not on your, let's say, on your side. On the other hand, we are discussing this, so I cannot say anything more. In principle, yes. In practice, we are discussing this because, of course, it's very different to teach live and to teach. So there are multiple factors to be taken into account. So my point is, I'll try to, to keeping a pace to put all the videos online by the end of the year. And then do Q&As until everyone is satisfied in January. So then people that want to give the exam early in January, they can. And people that want to take more time, they also can. Okay? We can try to do this. Good. Okay, I want to stop talking now. So questions. So let's say, I think we covered epidemiology. I mean, are there questions on epidemiology or earlier? Okay, that was lecture 7. Then lecture 8, it was the separation of time scales. Let me go to the playlist so I can. Okay, so we went, okay, so the epidemiology, no. Then there was the separation of time scale functional responses, lecture 8. Any question? No, great. On limit cycles?
Yeah, I have one question about the Hopf bifurcation. because you say that the general equation is in polar coordinates r dot equal mu times r minus r. Okay, and how can we write, for example, for the Rosenwein-MacArthur model, how can we pass in polar coordinates and obtain an equation, a system like this? Because I tried it, but I cannot reduce the system to this form.
Okay. So what? Sorry, not much. Sorry, something. What is this? Not okay. Why is not writing? What is this? Sorry, some.
I guess you are zooming the board. It is like 500%.
No, I'm not. Ah, you think I'm zooming the board?
Yeah, you can see it in the bottom left. Yes.
Oh, you're right. You're a smart guy. So
it is a common thing in these softwares.
Should be. Oh, I see. Oh, that's beautiful. I learned something. Thank you. Okay. So I am always confused about the. Okay, great. Okay. So okay. So you have the model, and I mean you know that you have the fixed point. Okay. So what you have to, so you have x, let's say x and y. Oh, sorry. X, y, and x, and you have this fixed point which is like x naught, y naught. Okay. So what you have to do is, I mean, the variable. I mean, one point which is important is that when we write that form, we are always considering that we are expanding around the fixed point and we are expanding around the bifurcation point. So the variables I would introduce are like x minus x naught squared plus y minus y naught squared, and this is r squared, right? So this measures the radius of the circle, okay? And then you want theta, which should be the r tangent of x minus x naught, y minus y naught. Is this what you are trying to do?
Yes.
Okay. So then, I mean, what you have to do is that instead of writing dr, you write dr dt, and you can write it as d r dx dx dt plus dr dy dy dt. Okay. And then, I mean, you get an equation, and when it appears x and y. So one thing that is convenient is to first write x and y dot as a function of f r theta, and yeah. Okay. Is that clear what I'm saying or not?
Yes.
Right.
But,
so you can always, I mean, what I'm saying is that you can always write x minus x naught as r, the sine, I guess, of theta, and y minus y naught equal to r cosine of theta. Okay. So you can you write this function, and this function is going to be actually some f r theta, and then you write the one for theta, and this is going to be, of course, d theta dx, the x dt plus the theta dy dt, and this is going to be some g r theta. Okay. is this what you are doing?
Yes, approximately this. I didn't follow this this method exactly, but I tried to look at the system and then substitute x minus x not equal r sin theta and so on.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, yes. Okay. So at the end, you arrive to these two equations, right? Now, I don't know what form these have, but you arrive to these equations, right?
Yeah.
Now, what you want to do is then, so to expand around the bifurcation point and around the fixed point, okay? So the fixed point written in these coordinates is, let's say, r equal to 0, right? This characterizes the fixed point, right? Okay. So any theta becomes completely negligible close to the fixed point because you don't have any phase, right? Okay. So what you have to do is that you write r minus r star, which in this case is r because this is 0. And so what you do is that you expand f r theta. Sorry, this will depend, this function here. Okay, let me say something. So this is a fixed point. So it means that f0 theta will be equal to 0 and g0 theta will be equal to 0. Okay. I'm not sure about the g. So this will be equal to 0. Okay. Right. So what you have to do is then to simply write the expand around the bifurcation point. Okay. So this f0 theta will depend on some parameter q, which are the parameters of the model, which were how did we call the parameter of the MacArthur?
It was m. I didn't remember.
And d, I think.
Yes, I think so. Yes, m and d.
Okay. So great. So you have these parameters, and actually you could write it as a function of the carrying capacity, right? We were using the carrying capacity. Yeah. Let's say that is a function of the carrying capacity, and we use the carrying capacity as the parameter you change. And so what you want to do is that you want to expand fr theta around r equal to 0 and k equal to kc. Okay. So when you do that, when you expand this function here, what you're gonna get is, in principle, is you're gonna get f of 0 theta kc plus f of df of the r in r equals 0, k equal to kc. Let's call it, well, this is r, okay? Plus, let me call q equal to k minus kc. So here I have df dq, r equals 0, k equal to kc, q plus df dr dq, qr, etc., right? So you have to compute all these derivatives, and substitute these different terms. Okay. What? So, for instance, this you know already that is 0, because f of r equal to 0 is 0. So by continuity, also in bifurcation point is 0 because it's a fixed point. Okay. And so you might get this and the other one. Now, for instance, let's say that you, I mean, if your problem was that you had this term that didn't go away, I mean, you can always recast these. So then you get something like a plus bq r plus, let's say, r cube. Okay. You can always change the definition of AR, sorry. You change the definition of Q and you say, oh, this is R dot some C times a new parameters which that I call P R plus R cube, where P is equal to A plus B. Sorry, let's remove this C. A plus B R. A plus B cube. Okay. I can always redefine this parameter. I don't want that. I mean, there is nothing that requires me that the bifurcation point in this model is in Q equal to 0. It can be in Q whatever.
Okay, I have to do the calculation and check it.
Yes. I mean, if you want, if it doesn't work, I mean, I'm happy to give a look at the calculation.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I'll check it and
yeah. I mean, try to compute. I mean, the point where there might be problems are calculating these.
Yeah, because at some point I couldn't find a way to express this these two functions in a simple way, because I had too much a tangent and
exactly.
so.
Yes. I mean, you can also, if it simplifies the calculation, you can, but I doubt, you can also define a new parameter, let's say, I don't know, xi, and you call it, which is the tangent of theta, right? Instead of writing this expression function of r and theta, you can write r and xi.
Okay.
I mean, you don't, the point is that you don't really care about this, right?
Okay.
I mean, what your problem is actually the equation for r. So it's this equation here.
Okay.
Because for the equation for theta, I mean, what matters is the first term.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Good. Okay. So we were about lecture 8. Sorry. Yes, 8/9 limit cycles. Is there any other question about limit cycles?
Actually, I have another question, but I think it's very short. It's about the Lyapunov exponent, because at certain point you said that the exponent of the divergence in I know, but this is in chaos, I think.
Yes. I mean, ask it anyway. It's fine.
Okay. You say that the Lyapunov exponent was that in the formula for the divergence of two trajectories. But I mean, how can we compute it? It's a general.
I mean, you cannot compute it. You mean analytically or numerically?
Yeah.
Analytically, forget it. I mean,
okay.
It's. I mean, in general, it's very. What you do is to compute it numerically, right? So what you take is I mean, numerically is easier, right? So you write the, let's say, Lorentz equation. You take two point and you slightly perturb it and you see how they separate. The point is that numerically you have to be I mean, to keep attention that you want to go to times that are large enough, because for short times, I mean, there is not necessarily, it's not necessarily growing exponentially, right? There are multiple time scales. involved. So for short times, it's like that. For times that are too large, these 2 points are random points on their tractor, so their distance don't change much over time. So you want to go to times that are large but not too large.
Okay. Can we usually do like plot of a log plot of the distance and then take a linear fit of the?
Yeah, you can do that. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. This is the way to go.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes. But I mean, yes. Good. So, any other question about limit cycles? Okay. Any question about chaos?
Hello. Hello. I have a question about chaos.
Yes.
Okay. So I was looking at or understanding the definition. You mentioned 3 things.
Mm-hmm.
It is a deterministic system with no randomness, but it has sensitive dependence and initial conditions. So I understand those 2 parts. Can you explain more about the aperiodic long-term behavior?
That basically that says that it's not a limit cycle, so that you don't, if you go to arbitrary large times, so let's say that you take a trajectory, you go to you can take any arbitrary large times, and the trajectory never repeats twice.
Okay, so it doesn't repeat a certain behavior.
Yes.
Okay.
The point is that you could have a limit. I mean, imagine that you have a limit cycle with a period which is extremely large, right? You can see for large enough times, smaller than this period, a sensitive dependence on initial condition, but that will still be a limit cycle, right? Because it has a finite period. So if you take that period, which is large enough, then the trajectory repeats exactly the same over those periods.
Okay.
Okay. On the other hand, I mean, a very informal way to think at chaos, which is not, it's very informal, but you can think at chaos as a limit cycle with infinite period. So it's like, which is, I mean, it's not useful, but in some sense might be a good parallel.
Okay.
And the reason I'm saying that it happens often that transitions from limit cycle to chaos, so bifurcation from limit cycle to chaos, involve the period of the limit cycle to diverge. Okay, so you have a limit cycle and the period becomes larger and larger, and that's at a certain point, which is the bifurcation point, diverges, and you have chaos. That's why I'm saying you can think of that. It's informal, but good. So, any other question on chaos? Okay. Good. So, after chaos, we started the mess of stochasticity. So, any question on stochastic exponential growth?
I have a question, but it's
Sure.
from the final section, so I don't know if anyone else has like questions.
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, we can cover stochastic exponential growth, and then we discuss about Darwin and friends.
Oh no, but my question is from section 11.5.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Ask the question.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to talk about when we derivate the probability and we put it like in expressions of Jn minus Jn minus 1. And we said that's constant because well, the derivative of the probability should be 0. We said, okay, then Jn is equal to Jn minus 1. That's equal to a constant. And we can say that constant is 0 on the assumption that the limit as n tends to infinity of p and t times n is 0, right? So maybe I wanted like understand it more intuitively or something about the physical meaning about that.
Yes, it's a great question. So just to recap, so we wrote the master equation. I hope the notation was this, and we can write this as sort of something like the difference between two currents, right? Okay. So what we said is that when and these two currents here are like some, can be written in terms of rates. And for instance, in the case of, well, in general, let's say that you go from n to n plus 1 with some rate b of n, and you go to n minus 1 with some rate d of n, which can have arbitrary dependence on n. So we say that this Jn is equal to d n minus 1 pn minus 1 t minus plus, sorry, b n plus 1 t n plus 1 t, right? Was this the thing I was saying, or I was saying something else?
Yes, it's exactly that.
Okay. And the j n minus 1 is equal to d is equal to dn pn t plus b n pn t. There is something.
I have that Gn minus 1 is dn pnt minus b times
Yes, exactly. This
n
is
minus 1. Yeah.
Because this doesn't make sense, right? So makes sense, but so I think here it's d. Okay. I think that this is b n plus 1 p n plus 1 t minus d n p of n t, and j n is equal to b n p of n t minus d n minus 1 p of n minus 1 t. This makes sense, okay? Right, this was the setting. So we said we have the master equation, which describes how the, can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, I saw, okay.
But the term b, it is a function. It is the b of n
Yes.
plus 1, right?
I mean, let's say we can generalize and it works like the same, right?
Okay.
If you want, you can think of this as bn dn. You can think this is bn plus m.
Okay.
But let's say it's a function.
Yeah.
So this is the setting, and we said if we want the stationary distribution, what we want to set is dp dt equal to 0. And what we get is jn minus 1, which means that this quantity is a constant. Okay. Now, we said if different condition holds, including the probability that p of n to infinity, p of nt is p of nt goes to 0 for any t. Okay. Then, or better, if you want, you can also say that the limit of time going to infinity of this quantity goes to 0. Then j of n is clearly equal to 0. Okay. Well, probably in this case, when I introduce the function, you should replace this with some function of n. But let's say that I say that for any function of n, this goes to 0. Okay. Then j of n is equal to 0. Okay. Now you can think of this in the case of linear rates, and this f is linear. You can easily generalize to arbitrary rates. Okay. The question is, what does this condition mean? Okay. What do I mean with that condition? You can play, I mean, the physical interpretation of this condition is fairly simple, actually. So think about the stochastic exponential growth, right? In the stochastic exponential growth, right, the condition we want to check is p of nt, what this quantity tends to, okay? Right? Now, the point is that in stochastic exponential growth, what you see is that the mean n over time grows exponentially, right? In time. Which means that if you want the probability, well, will be some distribution around this point, which is like becoming larger and larger, but it will be peaked around a quantity that is increasing exponentially, okay? So for instance, in stochastic exponential growth, you can easily expect that this quantity here, or better, the limit for time going to infinity, this is larger than 0, okay? Because the probability distribution, okay, for large enough times is becoming like peaked. It has a peak at large values of n, okay? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, can you repeat what is the limit for n which diverges to infinity of n p of n t?
This one?
Yeah, without the limit with the time which tends to infinity.
Yeah, let me check one thing, because while I was saying that, I have a doubt about the order of these two limits. But the point is, what you want to check, I mean, the physical interpretation of this is the following. You might have processes where the value, for instance, of n going to infinity becomes, large values of this quantity n becomes more and more likely as time progresses, right? Because the system grows sort of unbounded value of of n, right? So the point is that to have a stationary distribution, you need somehow that your process is constrained to finite values. That's the physical interpretation. So for instance, stochastic exponential growth doesn't have this property. Now let me write that condition correctly. Where I am. Where I am. Oh, sorry. So well, I mean, let's instead of using these, there were 4 conditions. One condition is that the sum from 0 to infinity of n p of nt, that this was not diverging for large times, right? For any time, okay? So if you look at this is just the average n, okay? And in the case, for instance, of exponential growth, this quantity here, it's like the exponential of RT, right? So it's clearly that this condition is not met, right? I think that I said something wrong in the class, though, because in the class, I somehow, let's say, I somehow alluded to this order of the limits. I think that the correct way to write the condition is that the limit of n going to infinity, the limit of time going to infinity of np of nt, this has to be equal to 0. Okay? So what I'm saying is that for large times, right, if I take very large times and I take this limit here, this limit goes to 0. So that the tail of the distribution goes to 0 fast enough. Okay? And this condition, note that is like strictly related to the condition I wrote above, that the limit of time going to infinity, the sum of n going from 0 to infinity of n, well, technically I should do the same, that the sum from n going to 0 to infinity, the limit of time going to infinity of n p of nt is convergent, right? Clearly, if this limit is not met, clearly, sorry, the fact that this is finite implies this condition here. Okay. Is that clear now, or both to Mattia and don't remember who asked the question? Graving.
So, so that last sum was I didn't understand the when you put the sum, just to see the sum of n equal to 0 to infinity, I think.
No, what I'm saying is that, okay, is it clear what this condition means?
Okay, yes.
This condition means that the average, let's say, abundance does not diverge for large times.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay. And in particular,
sorry, just a question. This condition with the limit inside the sum doesn't mean that the average abundance on the on the limit distribution doesn't diverge.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, there is no limit distribution in this case, right?
Yeah.
Because if these diverge, you cannot define one, right?
Yeah. Because if we take the limit inside the sum, we are taking the average of the limit, no?
I mean, the point. Well, the point is that when, I mean, let's say when this is lower than infinity, you can take the limit outside.
Yeah.
So if this exists, you can take the limit outside. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So we are assuming the average. Yeah, the average always is always defined and never diverge for every time.
Well, I mean, my issue with this, okay, I'm pretty sure about the order of this limit. Let me think about this. I mean, I cannot come up with a sort of stupid, I mean, convoluted enough example where the order matters actually. All the, I mean, in this case, right? Because well, I mean, the point, okay, no, this is stupid, right? So if I write this condition, under the condition I'm writing, I can always take this outside, right? Do you agree?
Yeah. Okay. So, because we are assuming that it is always.
So I'm writing the condition, I can take it outside. So yes.
Okay.
Right. Yes. So this is just a condition for the average to exist, right? I want that the average of n at time t, sorry, that the limit of n at time t, the average exists, but that this it's finite. So clearly, if that is not finite, then I mean, I cannot write a stationary distribution because that stationary distribution is going to be picked around an infinite value. Okay.
Okay, so if I have understood, assuming that the average is always finite, then we can pass to the limit inside the sum and therefore define a distribution to which converge in times our.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, well, the point is, if you assume this condition, then this condition here implies this condition there. And this condition there implies that j of n, the limit of n infinity, j of n star, this is equal to 0, right?
Okay.
And we add this, sorry, this is all for the stationary ones. So we add this condition here, but we said, if I go to large enough n, okay, if I go to large enough n, this current has to be equal to 0. This j has to be equal to 0. So since this is equal to 0, these two, and that condition there implies that jn star is equal to 0 for every n.
Okay.
Right. Because if you take this condition together with this condition, you you obtain that this constant is 0. Okay.
Okay.
So the important point is that so in this particular example is something that you don't have to worry a lot, in the sense that basically you have two scenarios, right? This is the important message. You have two scenarios. One scenario where for large times the system goes to, in this case, to very large values. So the probability distribution doesn't, for large values, becomes wider and wider and takes a longer and longer range of conditions, and therefore you cannot define, I mean, for large times it becomes an arbitrary large values in the whole space of values, which in this case is infinite. Okay. So if you have this very large space of values that the probability can take, like in this case where you can take any positive value, any natural number of individuals, then there is that possibility. And in that case, you cannot define a stationary distribution. On the other hand, if the stationary distribution is somehow constrained to some values, or the average is finite, then you can define it, and basically you have just to set the current equal to 0. Okay. There is a third case which is not possible in one dimension. One dimension meaning here you have one species, which is the case that if you are in if you have that somehow what you see here is that we went from j of n equal to j of n minus jn minus 1 equal to 0. Okay, equal to a constant, and then we set this constant equal to 0. Now, if you have multiple dimensions, which for instance could be you have an n and a m. Let's say this is one. I don't know if I want to tell. No, I will not tell you now. I'll tell you later. Okay, I'll stop here. I'll tell you later in the following class, in one of the following classes. The point is that there is a third case which we'll briefly touch, and is the difference between equilibrium and non-equilibrium, and is something that requires more dimensions to appear. Remember this point where I said this, and it becomes. I mean, we will see that in one of the following classes. I think this is not a good setting to illustrate that. Okay. Any other question about stochastic exponential growth?
I have a question.
Yes.
It is for the solution of the master equation with the generating function.
Yes.
You consider solution in the case with the generating function is a constant. What is the reason? It is just for simplicity, or?
No, that is a trick. So it's a way to solve partial differential equations. So it's a method, right? And it's called the method of characteristics. So what you do is not that you assume that the generating function is a constant. What you say is that the generating function will be some function, and in this case is a function of two variables, right? So in this case, the generating function is a function of two variables. Let's say this variable z and time. Okay. So take any arbitrary function which is a function of two variables. You will be able to find a curve which corresponds to equal height. Right. So imagine that you are climbing a mountain. There is a path you can follow so that you don't change the height you don't change altitude, right? That is exactly the same. So I can always find some curve g of z of s, t of s, so that this quantity here is a constant. Okay. And this corresponds to the directions where the function, sort of the slice where the value of the function g doesn't change, right?
Okay.
So imagine that you take a slice and you select that slice. Now, the question is, instead of solving, I mean, a useful trick is to try to find these slices, right? And basically, this is what we did. You sort of slice the function g in terms of these planes that corresponds to a given height, and you find what is the curve corresponding to a given height.
Okay, I see it.
That is the trick. Yes.
Another thing is
It's a useful trick because it allows you to transform a partial differential equation into an ordinary differential equation, right? Because you go from finding a function of two variables to solving two equations for ordinary differential equations, which are the equation for this trajectory. That's why it's useful. Okay. Any other question?
I have a little question on the final part when we define the C function to normalize the initial probability stationary distribution.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a function that depends on the parameters b over d and m over b, right? So when we are working with like real models of stochastic dynamics, is there a way to compute that function analytically, or is we're going to do it numerically?
This is, in a way, this is what statistical mechanics is about, right? Computing the normalization factor. So in general, there are cases where you are able to compute it analytically, and cases where you are not, right? So, I mean, in some sense, you should consider yourself lucky, very lucky, if you have a probability distribution up to a normalization factor, right? In general, it depends. So, I mean, it's most, let's say, the cases where you can write everything except the normalization factor are smaller, much smaller compared to the case where you cannot write anything at all.
So the choice,
you will not able to find the stationary distribution.
Okay. So the choice of C as the name of the function is related to this being a partition function or sort of a partition function, or?
Yes, I mean, if you want, yes. I mean, in the sense that you can, I mean, you can use that to do the usual tricks you do in statistical mechanics. So if you have this function here, you can derive this function. You can get some moments or so. But it's really, I mean, there is no physical meaning associated to that. It's just really a normalization function, a normalization factor.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other question about stochastic exponential growth? Good. So,
sorry, I have one, because at a certain point in the last part, when you set some conditions, you said also something about ergodicity. But I haven't understand what of this condition corresponds to ergodicity.
Well, well, I didn't say that. I tried to avoid it because I mean, I didn't want to add too much without. So the point is, when we go from saying, so what we want to calculate is the stationary distribution is the limit for large times of the probability distribution, right? And what we do is that we say, well, this limit, we can calculate this limit by setting the derivative of this probability equal to 0, right? So this, if you think about this, I mean, it makes sense, but it's not something that you can do in general, right? So imagine that you have a system like this, right? So let's say that I have different states So for instance, in this case, I have like a population n, n plus 1, n plus 2, n minus 1, and I can jump from n to n plus 1 to n plus 2, and I can jump back, right? Okay, just to, sorry. Right, this is the sort of the transitions between the configuration of my system. Now imagine that I describe some other distribution and I have some state here, right? And I jump over there. Okay, I have some rates, and then I have other configurations here that do something else. Okay. Now, if you write dp dt equal to 0, okay, what you're going to find are a set of solutions which corresponds to, let's say, let's call it P1 is something that is different from 0 in these states, and P1 is equal to 0 in those states. And I have P2, which is equal to 0 in those states, and P is different from 0 in those states. Okay, so you have some probability distribution which associate some number to all these states, which is different from 0, and here is equal to 0, and P2, which is equal to 0 here and different from 0 here. Okay, so you can construct a P1 and a P2 such that dp dt is equal to 0 for any linear combination of P1 and P2. Okay, and the point is that it's clear that if you have two different the physical meaning is if you have two different subsystems that are not connected, the stationary distribution will depend on when you where you start, right? If you start in one system, you're gonna be always there. If you start on the other system, you will always be on the other. If you start with some probability lambda in one of these two, you're gonna diffuse over there but stay there, right? Because you never diffuse between the two. So the point of ergodicity is something about the fact that it exists a unique solution, basically.
Okay.
Yes, that's, I mean, I think it's pretty clear informally how that enters into the picture, right?
Yeah. Thanks.
Yes. Okay. Good. Any other question about stochastic exponential growth? So, good. I don't know if any of you watched it or you are. Is there any question about the very long but very short introduction on evolution?
I haven't watched the evolution video yet.
Okay, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's no, yeah. I mean, again, it's. I mean, I'm trying to push you a little bit, but I'm also trying to follow the pace. So, I mean, you are not required to watch all the videos before the Q&A. It's just good that you push yourself a little bit. But I think it's also good if anyone has a question that can ask. I mean, we can go multiple speeds. Go ahead.
I have just a little question about something you said in the video, because at some point you said, like, okay, the only traits that can be heritable are the genotype, right? But after that you said, like, well, not exactly.
Yes.
But after that, all that I saw in the video was, okay, it seems that what's heritable, it's the genotype. So what's?
Yes, the point is that, okay, it's a good question. Let's say the vast majority of traits that are heritable are in the genotype. but you can have what is called epigenetic variation, which is also heritable. So, for instance, I mean, the simplest example are to formulate these are in bacteria or in cells that are unicellular. So a cell, right, at a certain state is what? Is like the genotype, so the DNA with all the instructions to make other cells, to make proteins, etc. But a cell is not just DNA, right? It's also the proteins that are expressed and the nutrients that are inside the cells and what the cell is doing in that moment. Right? And what the cell is doing in that moment is not genotype, it's phenotype, and it depends on the environment. Right? Now, when a cell divides, right, is not dividing only the DNA, is also dividing the content of the cell. Okay, so if for some reason a cell has more of this protein rather than that protein, the daughter is going to inherit that. Okay. Now the point is that this is, you can also think that somehow this is going to be lost. Let's say it's a little bit tricky, right? Because on one end you can say, well, but this depends on the environment, so it's going to be lost after a few generations because somehow the cell is ergodic, right? So the content of the cell will not depend on, I mean, yes, you are more similar also phenotypically to your mother if you are a single cell because you inherit all the things that are expressed there. But on the other hand, I mean, you are subject to fluctuations and you're going to lose that. But also, I mean, it's true if there is no pressure, I mean, if there is no selection pressure, right? But if there is selection pressure and the selection pressure is strong, then perhaps cells which have a given protein content are more likely to reproduce, right? So that is going to skew the phenotype in some direction, which is what evolution is about. And this is present with more complicated molecular mechanisms and also in eukaryotes, etc. Right? Now, it's a little bit controversial because, of course, it's something that it strongly depends on the time scales involved, right? Which is not, I mean, of course, I mean, if your phenotype is also changed due to the environment. If the time scale of the change of your phenotype is very fast compared to your lifetime, then yes, it's true that you can pass something, but that what you passed is not going to be passed to your granddaughter, right? Because then the state of your daughter is going to be whatever it is when it reproduces. So there needs to be some time scale which is for the epigenetic variation to not fade away, which is large enough compared to reproduction. And you need to have that this epigenetic variation confers a large enough effect on fitness, on your likelihood to reproduce.
Okay, so when these epigenetic changes are occurring, they are changing our genotype, right? Or
I mean, epigenetic variation is not affecting the genotype.
Okay.
Right? Because it's just is not the genotype, right? So it's, let's say, if you think at a single cell is the protein content, right? Which is produced by the genotype, but is also affected by the environment or by by whatever is the mapping from genotype to phenotype, which is often very complicated. Let's say that you have proteins, let's say, to be a more specific example, you have a protein which might have different folded states, right? That is clearly not genetic. It's clearly something that is epigenetic, because having a protein in one folded state or in another folded state is not something that depends on the genome, right? is something that it depends on the folded state. On the other hand, if that confers a strong advantage, right, it might be passed through the generation. So if you look at how many cells have this folded state, then you'll see that it's not 50-50 as you would expect by chance. You see what I mean?
Yeah. So there are not only traits in the genotype that are passed through the generations, there are also like encoding the folding of the proteins that's also can be passed over the generation.
Yes,
That's okay.
Yes, but I mean, I think it's more. I mean, I sort of did that because I didn't want this to become a distraction, right?
Mm.
The reason is that one of the common mistakes about understanding evolution is that it's important to understand that what is actually passed is what is heritable, right? And what is subject to selection and to evolution is what is heritable. So this could be a distraction in the sense that you say, well, I mean, it sort of confuse you in this sense, right? So you should keep, I mean, let's say for now, think at this as some sort of special case, just because everything is possible in biology.
Okay.
But I would say this is not particularly controversial. I mean, most of the selection acts on genotype.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other question on this part?
Hello. Can I ask? In the part where there is the natural selection, so I was thinking of like, so how do we say that, for example, for if there is climate change, so the causes is natural, but it is not like the effects of it is like it's not foreseen. So it seems like the natural selection is not self-evident. They understand.
Well, I mean, the self-evident, okay, so the point is that, okay, let me say what I meant with self-evident force. What I meant is that natural selection is not something about selecting what is good or bad. You can think it of a bias of, this is a way I like it to think about. It's a bias of what you're going to observe. So what you're going to observe is not the individuals that are better in some moral sense, right? Or that are optimal in some other sense. What you're gonna see are the individuals that reproduce more, that are the descendants of individuals that reproduced more, okay? This is what is this is self-evident, right? So natural selection is just the fact that you have a bias you might have biases in reproduction due to different traits, and you're going to see those traits that makes easier to reproduce, which doesn't mean that the fact that you reproduce more means that you are better, right? In some, I mean, also because better doesn't mean anything, right? It means that you have some ethics or some aesthetics, right? Of what is better, right? And that is not what is the point, right? Now, in terms to climate change, so this also means that from the perspective of evolution, doesn't make much sense if, doesn't make much difference if selection is induced by natural causes or artificial causes, right? I mean, also what is an artificial causes, it's very complicated to define, since after all, climate change is caused by us, which are a species, which are under the laws of biology and of evolution, right? So, right, so in some sense also, climate change is natural, not in the sense that is ethically good, right? The problem is associating to natural something which is good, right? So clearly climate change is caused by us and as the climate is changing, that is puts a strong selection pressure on species and individuals. Right? The fact that is not foreseen is not again. It's not something that is a big discriminant factor, right? The fact that it's not, I mean, evolution is, this is very important, right? Evolution is not something that is decided by individuals, right? Typically, we put this agency on top of individuals, saying, oh, the environment changed, therefore the individual evolved, right? Why, like it is a consequence of it's a response to change the environment which is changing, right? That is not what evolution is about, right? And if you want, the Luria-Delbruck experiment is exactly about that. The point is, what is troubling about and dangerous about climate change is that it puts a strong selection pressure on individuals, right? So it means that you had individuals which were very much adapt for a given condition, and now these conditions suddenly change, right? So is this, I mean, the point is that clearly this is not going to be the end of life on Earth, right? But it's going to be a huge bottleneck for life on Earth. So many species are going to go extinct, right? Because, I mean, you are putting a lot of selection pressure, you are making competition stronger, and species are going to go extinct, right? Then some species are going to survive, and they're going to do well with a temperature which is increased of however delta T we will have. But I mean, this is not, the point is that this is not going without pain, right? And we should not be worried about it. We should be worried about that. But the point is that you should not think at, let's say there are 2 points, right? The consequences of these are going to be huge, first. Second, this is not going against the law of evolution, right? It's not something different from what happens in evolution. Yes, there was another question.
It was just about evolution, that natural selection, for example, you said that it's not good or bad. So if there is a species and there's a volcanic eruption and it only lives there and it dies out, that's also a natural cause, but it's not good. So we can't say that it's because of humans.
No,
that humans are doing something bad.
There are different points, right? So the point is, what is, I want this not to be misunderstood. So the good or bad is not about how we as individuals or humans as a species act in this world, right? We have like a brain, and encoded in this brain, we have thousands of years of culture, and associated to these cultures, we have a conception of what is good or bad. And it's very good that we have such ethical and social norms, right? And the reason why we have them, I mean, you can think of, is because they produce a benefit for the group, right? Having groups with strong ethical norms does good for the group, right? And you could think how ethical norms emerge as the result of cultural evolution, but that is a different story, which we'll put out of the way. So we have ethical norms. We say something is good and something is bad. We should do this. We should keep saying things are good or bad and do that, right? But it's important to say the difference between what we consider good or bad, what we like and don't like, okay? And what can we do to like produce as little harm as possible? Totally agree on that. What I'm saying is that evolution, so not talking about humans, right? Evolution started way before humans. Right? Evolution doesn't operate to produce something which is better in some ethical sense, right? or something that is worse in some ethical sense. What I'm saying is that a species that is evolved in some environment, right, doesn't necessarily, I mean, or if you have like let's say, even before humans, you had mass extinctions, right? Which means that you have period where diversity strongly decreased because you had the environment that was changing, etc. This doesn't mean that this time we don't have a responsibility to that, right? Or this is not a way to say, oh, we should not do anything because it happened before, right? I mean, we are doing something which is becoming closer and closer to this mass extinction. So I think we should also undo it a little bit, or as much as we can. What I'm saying is to separate the two things, right? So it's a problem if you give agency to evolution or to the individuals that experience evolution. But this doesn't mean that our actions are not under an ethical norm. Right? But I mean, we should also, I mean, this is something that we should think about. An ethical part is, well, no, I'll skip that. Okay. I'll discuss in front of a coffee where we can. But it's an important distinction, right? So the fact that species become extinct by purely natural causes, meaning that we don't have anything to do with that, doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility, right? So the fact that humans die does not mean that we can kill anyone we like because they die anyhow. So it's a difference, right? It doesn't, I mean, the fact that there is climate change is because there are action we are doing that produce it, right? So it's a very different thing to witness someone dying and actively killing someone from an ethical perspective, okay? But on the other hand, that the fact that we are not killing someone doesn't mean that there are natural causes which produce people dying. Right? Okay, is that clear? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Any other question?
Can I ask? So, with what you said, what is the main like motivation of tracking the evolution of certain species?
Well, I mean, let's say why we should be interested. Is this a question?
I lost connection.
Sorry, the question is why we should be interested in understanding how evolution shifts the traits of some species.
Yeah, considering that there are many, yeah.
Well, there are multiple answers to this question. One question is that in some deep sense, this is the a way to try to answer the why question in biology, right? So if you, right, I mean, and this is a very deep question, right? So if you, when you ask why dogs have legs and not wheels, that's, I mean, because of evolution, right? If you ask why birds fly that way, well, the answer is in evolution, right? So anything that you can ask in biology that has to be related to why it is like this and not something that, rather than how it works. So why it works in this way, it's because of evolution, right? So the answer is in understanding how that structure, that individual, that species evolved. So this is already, I think, why we should study, right? Because it's so fundamental in biology. Now, of course, there are some specific applications where it's extremely important to, for instance, understand how evolution progresses or even predict where evolution is going, right? Just to give you an example, flu, right? The virus, not the usual one, the other one. flu, as we discussed it briefly, as a seasonality, right? So everybody, or a large portion of the population, gets flu every year, and there are many people dying because of that, and we want to avoid that, people dying and people getting sick. So we have a vaccine, right? The point is that flu viruses are evolving quite fast. They are, and what does it mean that they are evolving, right? It means that they change the receptor protein a little bit so that they are not recognized by the immune system, okay? Now, one important thing, I said they change. This doesn't mean that there is a virus and they say, oh, guys, let's tweak it a little bit, right? It's not, there is no agency in that. There are mutations which are random, and the individuals which have a protein structure that escape better the immune system without altering too much the function is performing better. And so they reproduce more, right? There is no agency in this. It's just the viruses that we're going to see next year are some viruses that did that by chance, okay? So it's like to have 100 drunk people in a labyrinth, right? They have to find the exit. I mean, there is going to be some guy that have found the exit, right? And that guy didn't choose that, right? But somehow they took the right turns at every step, at every point, right? Okay. So now, on the other hand, you want to have a vaccine, right? So how the hell you're going to have a vaccine and distribute it, right? So the vaccine that is, I mean, in principle should be available, that is not available now, because of course it's, I mean, there are a huge request. That vaccine is something that was produced about February last year. I mean, it was sort of decided the strain it was corresponding to. So it was sort of defined, that vaccine, February last year, where we didn't have any infection of the new strain that is present this year. That strain was not even present, right? Probably. How was that decided? Well, because we have models of evolution which are able to forecast where the protein structure is going. Right? So understanding evolution in that case, understanding how the traits are changing the population, allows you to forecast 1 year from now where the most common traits of the virus is going to be, and therefore make an effective vaccine. Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? So for vaccines, is it then purely by chance that these mutations occur if we can predict them?
I mean,
Isn't there a deterministic part to that?
Well, we know, the point is that you have a lot of constraints, right? So there are, I mean, the constraints are given by, I mean, in principle, this is a hugely dimensional problem, right? The point is that you have a lot of constraints because that structure needs to be functional. So many direction where you can move makes the protein non-functional. And you have another constraints that you cannot go back, right? You want still to escape the immune system. So you are somehow escaping someone, right? And you have huge constraints. So you cannot like just run back. And this gives you a direction of where you're going, right? This is a naive sense. Now, all these models, I mean, are very, very convoluted. They work on spatial gradients. So you see basically you have different stage of immunity. So somehow you see how evolution is progressing. But even if they are random, you more or less guess what is the structure. Now, this doesn't need to be a perfect guess, right? It needs to be something good enough so that your immune system is able to recognize the virus if you have the vaccine. Now, this is a problem for flu virus, for instance. For other viruses, they don't evolve so fast and is not a big trouble. For instance, this is believed for COVID, right? Which is a good news. So these are, another example is artificial selection, right? For instance, most of the fruits and vegetables you eat are the subject, actually not most, the vast majority are the subject of artificial selection. Anything that is in culture is the subject of artificial selection. And what it is that if you are growing whatever, from corn to bananas to whatever you can think of, what you want is that you want your fruit to be more juicy, you want to have the grains contains more nutrients, etc., etc. So what you're going, I mean, this is how it was done once upon a time, but what you were doing from let's say 300 to 3,000 years ago was that you having different crops, and you were planting the seeds of the fruits that were more juicy, right? And these produce a selection on the species, on the individuals, sorry, because you select artificially some traits. Now, the way it's done now, it's more complicated. We can do genetic engineering, or we induce mutations, so then it's easier to increase variation, etc., etc. But yeah. But I mean, really, go around and look how what you eat actually looks in nature, and it's completely different, right? We performed a huge selection on that. Actually, one of the theses of one of the book I sort of suggested to read, Sapiens, that book, what suggests is that actually also the plants sort of shifted our culture, and therefore they were sort of produced a huge cultural selection on us, right? Because we went from being harvester and spending 2 hours harvesting food to spend 10 hours going in the field to get more and more products. Anyhow, but yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, it's very interesting how the sort of the artificial selection on plants shaped also our culture and our civilizations. Yes. Any other question? I mean, I think that these are 3 answers. There might be more, but fundamentally, it's the most important forces in biology, right? In the sense that it determines what is there and why it's doing something. Yeah. Any question? Any other question?
Hello.
Yeah.
For the wait. So we did stochastic exponential growth. Will we also do stochastic predator prey?
No, we will not do that. If you're interested, I can tell you how to define it. We will not do that because it's very hard to do. I mean, what you can do is that to show in what limits stochasticity is not important, and you go back to the previous case. Otherwise, it's hard to do calculation. I can send you, let's say, I can send you a paper where they do, where they start multiple papers actually, where they study Lotka-Volterra without the limit cycle or with the limit cycle and the effect of stochasticity. I mean, I think it's just remind me on Slack, and I'll send you. You can remind me even now, and I can send you 5 minutes from now. But I think it's good. So, okay. Yeah, it's. I mean, it's very. Yeah, I'll send you. I mean, and if you have a question about that, I'm happy to answer you. Any other question? Great. So regarding next week, I'll tell you when we're going to meet, because there is the conflict with the school, but I don't want to do it too early in the morning. Too early in the morning for us. Yes. Because we are not all in Central European Standard Time. So,
Professor?
Yes.
So just to be sure, it's highly recommended to attend the school, right?
I mean, it's let's say it's highly recommended because I think it's gonna be good, but it's I mean, I can highly recommend a lot of things.
Yeah. I mean, in particular for the for the course.
The thing is that don't feel any pressure given the asymmetry of my status to follow the school. I mean, I will not check whether you follow it, and it's not required for anything. It's I think it's gonna be. I mean, if you are interested in these kind of topics, it's I mean, there are exceptional speakers, and I think there is. I mean, and I think you have all the sort of the knowledge to understand what they are going to say. So I think it's a good occasion, but I won't make it possible for you to follow. But again, feel free to. I know you are all busy, so there are many things that are good in life, but one cannot have them all, and there are things that are even better than the school. So.
Okay, thank you.
But of course, I mean, of course, then when we have the Q&A, if you follow and you have questions, I'm happy to discuss, because it's like sort of part of the material. But again, it's not at all, let's say, is not at all something that is part of the course in any institutional sense. Okay. Any other question? Also, like, all the lectures are going to be on YouTube, so you can also, I mean, sort of say or convince yourself that you will have time to watch them. So there is no sort of any sense of urgency to do that. Okay. Good. Any other question?
Hello, can I ask? So now we are shifting to ecology, to evolution.
Yes.
We can still go back to the previous.
In terms of questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can we? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Q&A. I mean, the Q&A is something that you run, not that I run, right? So you decide. I mean, what are the questions? And we, as I said, we can go beyond the end of the official end of lectures. Okay. Good. Okay, we had a long session, so let's stop here, I would say. So I'll write on Slack what is a good timing. I have all the calendars of both the PCS students and the diploma students, so I'll find a slot which is good for you all. Well, thanks a lot. See you next week. Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. See you.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.